Hi, this is Melissa from Renewed Relics, and today I'm going to be going over the basics of repairing a garment using a needle and thread. We're going to start with the very first step of sewing, and that's threading a needle. I'm going to be demonstrating the way that I found the easiest to thread a needle, and I'm using yarn and a yarn needle because they're a little bit easier to see on the camera. But this is going to work just as well with the finer needles and threads. So first, if you take a look at the end of the yarn, you can see that there's a bunch of different smaller strands, and it's the same thing with the finer threads. Having those strands hanging out all loose makes it a lot more difficult to get the thread through the eye of the needle. So first we are going to take the thread and roll it between the tips of my fingers, and that creates a nice solid point that's a lot easier to get through the needle. So once we've rolled it between our fingers, squeeze your fingers back, revealing just the tip of the needle, and then push the needle down on the thread and kind of wiggle it through. And once you've got just enough of the thread through the needle to grab the point, you just grab it, pull through, and you've got yourself a threaded needle, and you're ready to go. Alright, now that we've got our needle threaded, I'm going to show you how I like to set up the needle and thread for sewing by hand. So what I'm going to do is create a double strand of the thread with the needle. And so you start by taking the short end of the thread, and you're going to pull it through the needle until it lines up with the back end, and then we're just going to tie it in a knot. So this creates a double thickness of thread, which makes for a little bit more durable sewing, and it also creates a solid loop, which will work for beginning sewing on the garment. I've used a shrink ray to turn my yarn needle and yarn into a regular sized needle and thread, so we're all set to start patching up a hole in the armpit of a shirt. So I just so happen to have a t-shirt that I may or may not have purposely cut a hole in the armpit of for demonstration purposes. You can see it right there. I've got the t-shirt turned inside out, and that's the direction you want to have it for sewing. The handy thing about when the holes occur right on the seam is that you can sew them shut, and the repair seam is going to blend right into the seam of the shirt, and you won't be able to notice at all. Even if the hole isn't directly next to the seam, if it's like on the shirt and it's in the armpit, most people aren't staring at the armpit of your shirt, so any little imperfections that happen from your repair aren't a big deal, so don't worry about it. For the purposes of demonstration, I'm using white thread so you can see what I'm doing on the black shirt, but you're going to want to use a thread as close to the color of the shirt as you can find. If it's not an exact match, don't worry, only little bits of the thread is going to show through, but the closer you can find a match, the better it's going to look. So we have our thread, and the two ends are tied together, creating one giant loop of string. And you're going to start at one end of the hole. You're going to fold it so that the hole is right at the edge of the fabric. And then you've got the edge of the hole right about here. But I want to start sewing just a little bit before the hole. And all of the stitches that I'm going to make are going to be a little bit below where the tear in the fabric starts. When the edges of fabric tear, they become a little bit weaker around the edges where they've torn and frayed, see here. So making sure that you're stitching a little bit below into where the fabric is still whole is going to create a stronger stitch that isn't going to tear right back out again. So starting a little bit to one side of the hole, just going to stitch right from front to back. I'm going to pull my thread through until I'm almost to the very end. You could just pull it through here, and the hole in, or the knot in the thread may or may not pull through. So one way to make sure that the thread doesn't just pull right back out is to stick the needle through that loop that we've made with the knot. So you're going to go right in between those two threads and pull it tight. And then what that does is it creates a nice little loop, and it slips that stitch right on there, and that's not going anyplace anytime soon. So then you're just going to move from the side that you started on all the way across, just making stitches from front to back and pulling it through. And as you pull the thread tight, you want to make sure that this loop doesn't go all crazy and get caught in the way. So just kind of keep it straightened out as you pull it tight, line it up, and cinch it. You'll want the stitches to be fairly close together. They don't have to be right next to each other, but probably no more than a 1/16 of an inch apart. Just kind of gauge it. Just kind of right next door, neighbors, those stitches are. And we'll pull that taut, keeping this loop in check so it doesn't get all tangled. You might have to push it over so it doesn't slip off through the side. And we're just going to keep going all the way across doing that same thing. Okay, so we finished up our stitching. We've gone from one side of the hole all the way across to the other and then stitched our way back. Now it's time to bind off or tie off our stitch. So we're going to take our needle and thread and loop through just like we did before for all the other stitches, going from front to back. And you're going to pull almost all the way through until you have just a little bit of a loop there. Then you're going to go through that loop with the needle and then pull it tight. And as you pull it tight, that loop is going to cinch down on the thread and hold it in place. And we're just going to repeat that one or two more times. And now that thread is not going anywhere. So on the third time through, yeah, extra time never hurts. Pull it down, and then just going to snip it off pretty close to the stitch there. And now we have our finished repair. Alright, so I have finished repairing the hole in the armpit. Got the shirt turned right side out again, and as you can see there's just a couple little peaks of the white thread showing through. Had I used black thread to match the shirt, that would not really be noticeable at all. If you pull it apart you can see a few more of the stitches, but when the fabric is just relaxed, it looks just like that, and voila, you've got yourself a repaired shirt.